Genevieve thought her husband Marcus was the most powerful man in the room. In her world, a universe of brushed steel, vintage champagne, and inherited arrogance, power was a thing you wore. It was in the Patek Philippe on Marcus's wrist, the bespoke tailoring of his suit, and the easy, dismissive way he surveyed any room he entered. Tonight, at her best friend Clara's 30th birthday party, he was in his element, and Genevieve, by his side, was radiant with reflected glory. She had no idea that the quiet man she and her friends were systemically mocking, Clara's unassuming husband Adrian, could buy and sell Marcus's entire world with a single, silent phone call. Within a month, he would. This was the quiet truth that hummed beneath the surface of the party. Adrian Vance, known to this glittering assembly only as a vaguely defined consultant, sat in a plush armchair, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He endured the casual, cutting remarks with a placid dignity that they mistook for weakness. They thought he was simple. They thought he was unimportant. What they didn't know was that Adrian Vance was the sole, anonymous owner of Ethelred Global, the $78 billion pharmaceutical and biotech titan whose name was whispered with reverence in the very financial circles Marcus so desperately wanted to conquer. They were ants, posturing at the feet of a quiet god, and they had no idea the ground was about to shake. But before we dive into the delicious, catastrophic unraveling of their world, I want to welcome you. If you enjoy stories where patience wins, where dignity is its own reward, and where arrogance meets its perfectly tailored consequence, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to the party. The fuse has been lit. The only question is how long it will burn before the explosion. The room was a symphony of expensive tastes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city glittering like a spilled jewelry box. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the murmur of self-congratulation. Clara, the birthday girl, drifted through it all, a vision in emerald silk. She was beautiful, vibrant, and caught in a current not of her own making. She loved Adrian for his quiet strength, his steady kindness, the peaceful world he created for just the two of them. But she also craved the approval of friends like Genevieve, whose validation felt like a currency she couldn't bear to be without. And so she stood by, a pained smile on her face, as the people she called her friends sharpened their knives on the man she called her husband. Marcus leaned against the marble fireplace, a predator at rest. He swirled a brandy snifter, the amber liquid catching the light. He fixed his gaze on Adrian. "So, Adrian," he began, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of their small circle. "Still busy with the, consulting? Anything exciting? Helping some mid-level manager optimize their spreadsheets?" The others chuckled. It was a familiar routine. Marcus's feigned interest, designed only to highlight the perceived gap between his world of high-stakes corporate rating and Adrian's supposedly mundane existence. Adrian met his gaze without a flicker of emotion. "Something like that," he said, his voice calm and even. "I help companies streamline their operations, identify inefficiencies. It can be quite rewarding." "Oh, I'm sure," Genevieve chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She glided over to Adrian's chair, and her eyes fell to his wrist. He wore a simple, steel-cased watch with a worn leather strap. It was elegant in its simplicity, but to her, it was a symbol of mediocrity. "Clara, darling, you simply must get this man a proper timepiece for his next birthday. A man's watch says so much about him, doesn't it?" She looked at Marcus's wrist, where the complex face of his watch gleamed like a tiny, intricate machine of power. "It shows he values his time, that his time is valuable." Clara's smile tightened. "I like his watch, Jen. It was his father's." "Oh," Genevieve said, the single syllable conveying a world of pity. "How sentimental." Adrian's hand resting on the arm of the chair didn't move. His fingers were still. Only he knew that his other hand, in the pocket of his tailored but unassuming trousers, was resting on a small, symbolic object. It wasn't a key to a supercar or a platinum credit card. It was a small, worn, leather-bound journal, its pages filled not with appointments, but with complex chemical equations, long-term strategic plans, and the foundational architecture of the empire no one in this room knew he commanded. It was his real timepiece, a testament to decades of patient, relentless work. Touching it was like touching the source of his power, a silent reminder that this moment, this petty humiliation, was utterly insignificant. Another friend, Isabel, a woman whose entire personality was curated from lifestyle blogs, added her own subtle jab. "Your suit is a lovely color, Adrian, a very respectable choice. You know, Marcus's tailor could do wonders for you. He works with your frame, really builds out the shoulders. It's an investment, you see. It's not just clothing, it's armor for the corporate world." "I'll keep that in mind," Adrian replied, his tone so placid it was almost unnerving. He took a slow sip of his water. Inside, he was not angry. He was an architect observing a flawed structure, noting the stress points, the faulty materials, the inevitable points of collapse. He was cataloging these insults, not as personal wounds, but as data points. Each condescending remark, each pitying glance, was another entry in a ledger he kept in his mind, a list of grievances that would, in due time, be addressed. He glanced at Clara. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks, the way she nervously twisted the stem of her champagne flute. He saw her open her mouth to speak, to defend him, and then close it again as Genevieve looped an arm through hers and pulled her away, chattering about a coming ski trip to Aspen. Her silence was the only thing that truly touched him. The mockery of her friends was like the buzzing of insects, annoying but harmless. Her failure to swat them away, however, was a different matter entirely. It was a small crack in the foundation of their shared world. Later, as the party began to wind down, Marcus made his final move. He had just closed a moderately successful deal and was high on his own perceived genius. He clapped Adrian on the shoulder, a gesture of dominance disguised as camaraderie. "Listen, Adrian," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I might have a little something for you. One of my portfolio companies, a small logistics firm, they could use a fresh pair of eyes. Nothing glamorous, mind you, but it's honest work. Could be a nice little contract for you. I'll have my assistant call just give my assistant your number." It was the ultimate dismissal, an offer of charity, a powerful man throwing a scrap to a lesser one. Adrian looked at the hand on his shoulder, then back up at Marcus's triumphant face. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "That's very generous of you, Marcus," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Thank you for the offer. I'll certainly give it the consideration it deserves." He gently removed Marcus's hand from his shoulder. The gesture was not aggressive, but it was final. For a brief second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Marcus's face. The quiet confidence in Adrian's eyes was dissonant, out of tune with the man he had constructed in his mind. But the moment passed, and Marcus's arrogance reasserted itself. He laughed, loudly, and turned back to the dwindling crowd, the king of his small, fragile castle. An hour later, Adrian and Clara were in the car, moving silently through the sleeping city. The electric engine was nearly silent, amplifying the vast, echoing space between them. The scent of lilies from the party still clung to Clara's dress, a funereal fragrance now. She stared out the window, watching the streetlights slide by like lonely stars. The silence was heavier than any argument, colder than any angry word. She wanted to break it, to apologize, to explain, but she didn't know how. She didn't understand the true nature of the crime she had witnessed, nor the depth of her own complicity. She only knew that something had shifted, that a fine, invisible line had been crossed. Adrian drove, his hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead, his expression serene. But inside, the architect was done observing. The data had been collected. The calculations were being made. He wasn't planning revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional affair. Adrian Vance planned corrections. He adjusted systems. And the system that enabled the arrogance of Marcus Thorne and Genevieve Astor was about to be corrected. The first step had been their condescension. The second and far more important step had been his wife's silence. The consequences, he knew, would have to address both. The heavy silence of the car ride bled into the cool, minimalist expanse of their home. The house itself was a testament to Adrian's quiet nature. Clean lines, natural materials, and an absence of clutter that spoke of a clear and ordered mind. It was a space designed for peace, but tonight it felt like a museum, cold and empty. Clara slipped off her heels by the door, the soft thud of the expensive shoes on the polished concrete floor sounding like a judgment. She followed Adrian into the kitchen, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. He was at the counter, pouring himself another glass of water from the filtration tap, his movements as deliberate and unhurried as they had been all evening. "Adrian," she began, her voice small, "about tonight, about Genevieve and Marcus." He turned, leaning back against the counter. He looked at her, his gaze not angry, but something far more disconcerting, analytical. It was the look he got when he was solving a complex problem, distant and deeply focused. That's just how they are," she stammered, the excuse sounding flimsy even to her own ears. "They don't mean anything by it. It's like a game to them, this whole status thing. It's harmless." "Harmless," Adrian repeated. The word was not a question. It was a specimen he was holding up to the light, examining its every facet. "You believe it's harmless for a man to be judged not by his character, but by the brand of his watch? For a person's worth to be measured by the price tag on their suit? No, of course not. But it's just words, Adi. They're my oldest friends. I know they can be a lot, but they've been there for me." "They were there for you tonight?" he asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. "When they were mocking your husband, their host, in your home, on your birthday? Were they there for you then? Or were you there for them, providing an audience for their performance?" The question landed like a stone, sending ripples of shame through her. She had no answer, because he was right. She had been a spectator, a silent enabler. Her loyalty had been tested, and she had chosen the path of least resistance, sacrificing his dignity for her own social comfort. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I should have said something. I froze." "I know," he said, and the simple affirmation was more painful than any accusation. He wasn't granting her absolution. He was merely stating a fact. He pushed himself off the counter and walked past her, the subtle scent of his clean, unscented soap, a familiar comfort that now felt alien. "I'm tired, Clara. It's been a long night." He didn't wait for her. He walked down the long hallway to his home office, the one she rarely entered, the one she laughingly called his tinkering room. The door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click, shutting her out. Clara stood alone in the vast kitchen, the tears finally spilling over, hot and silent. The distance he had created wasn't one of anger, it was one of disappointment, and that felt infinitely more vast and impossible to cross. Inside his office, the atmosphere shifted. This was Adrian's sanctuary, his command center. Unlike the rest of the house, it was dense with information. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard, covered in what looked like a chaotic web of diagrams, arrows, and molecular structures. To a layperson, it was gibberish. To a biochemist or a market strategist, it was a roadmap to the future of medicine. Bookshelves overflowed with texts on everything from cellular biology to game theory. Adrian sat down at his large, uncluttered desk. He didn't turn on the sleek computer monitor. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn, leather-bound journal. He opened it. The pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting. It was a mix of personal reflection, scientific notation, and business strategy. He turned to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote the date. Below it, he didn't write about the party or the insults. He wrote a single name, Viridian. For a long moment, he simply stared at the word. It was a project name, a protocol he had been developing for years. It was a revolutionary gene editing therapy for a rare, aggressive form of pediatric cancer. It was Ethelred Global's single most important, most secret, and most valuable asset. It was a decade of his life's work, a potential miracle for thousands of children. It was also a weapon of unimaginable financial power. To launch it was to reshape the entire biotech landscape. He had intended to wait another year to complete one final set of long-term trials. But circumstances, he reflected, had a way of accelerating timelines. He picked up the secure satellite phone from his desk, a device that bypassed all conventional networks. He pressed a single speed dial button. It rang twice before it was answered. "Evelyn," he said, his voice now stripped of all pleasantry, possessing the crisp authority of a commander. "Adrian," came the reply. "Evelyn Reed, the formidable COO of Ethelred Global, a woman who knew him not as Clara's quiet husband, but as the visionary genius who had built an empire from a single patent." Her voice was sharp, alert, even at this late hour. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is proceeding as it should," Adrian said. "I'm moving up the timeline." There was a fractional pause on the other end. Evelyn was a master of processing information. "The Viridian Protocol?" she asked, her tone steady but laced with significance. "Yes," Adrian confirmed. "Initiate Phase 1 at market open. I want our preliminary efficacy data released. All of it. And I want a press conference scheduled for the Ethelred Foundation Gala in 4 weeks. I'll be making the announcement myself." Another pause, this one longer. Evelyn knew what this meant. Releasing the data would send shockwaves through the market. It would instantly make Ethelred the most powerful player in oncology, bar none. It would also utterly devastate any competitors in the space. "Understood," she said, the single word conveying absolute loyalty and competence. "Is there a specific catalyst for this acceleration?" She was too professional to pry, but her curiosity was evident. Adrian looked at the name he had written in his journal. He thought of Marcus's offer of charity, of Genevieve's pitying look, of Isabel's unsolicited fashion advice. He thought of the Patek Philippe, the bespoke suit, the entire hollow performance of status. Then his mind settled on the most important image, Clara's face, her eyes pleading for a peace she wasn't willing to fight for. "Let's just say," Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, "a competitor has made a strategic miscalculation. We're simply responding to market conditions." "I see," Evelyn said, and he knew that she did. "Consider it done. I'll have the preliminary reports on your desk by morning." "Thank you, Evelyn." He ended the call and placed the phone back on its cradle. He closed the journal and sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly in the silent room. He felt no anger, no glee, no desire for petty revenge. He felt only the quiet, cold satisfaction of a complex system being brought back into balance. Marcus Thorne and his friends had built their world on the illusion of superiority. Adrian was about to introduce them to the reality of power. The correction had begun, and it would be precise, methodical, and absolute. The days following the party unfolded in a state of strained politeness. On the surface, nothing had changed. Adrian was as attentive as ever, asking Clara about her day, ensuring the house ran with its usual quiet efficiency. But an invisible wall of glass now stood between them. His kindness was remote, his presence felt like an echo. Clara found herself missing the easy intimacy they once shared, the shared jokes, the comfortable silences. Now the silence was a chasm, and his politeness was a form of armor she could not penetrate. She tried to broach the subject of the party again one evening, as they sat in the living room, a book open but unread in her lap. "Adi," she said softly, "I miss you." He looked up from his tablet, his expression gentle. "I'm right here, Clara." "No, you're not," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Not really. You're a million miles away. I know I messed up. I know I should have defended you. Can't we just talk about it? Can't you be angry with me? Yell at me? Anything would be better than this quiet." Adrian set his tablet aside. "Anger wouldn't be productive, Clara. It wouldn't solve the underlying issue." "And what is the underlying issue?" she asked, desperate. "Values," he said simply. "You surround yourself with people who believe a person's worth is displayed on their wrist or stitched into the label of their coat. You say you don't believe that, but when tested, your actions, or your inaction, spoke louder than your words. You chose their comfort over our integrity." The truth of it stung, sharp and undeniable. "So what now?" she whispered. "Is that it? Do you just write me off?" "I don't know," he said, and the honesty of that admission was the cruelest blow of all. "I'm observing. I'm waiting. I need to see who you are when your friends aren't in the room." He picked up his tablet again, a clear signal that the conversation was over. Meanwhile, in their own gilded world, Clara's friends were oblivious. Genevieve and Isabel met for brunch at a chic, sun-drenched cafe that charged $20 for avocado toast. They dissected Clara's party with the precision of surgeons. "Honestly, I feel for her," Genevieve said, taking a delicate sip of her mimosa. "That husband of hers is such a void. No ambition, no spark. Did you see his watch? I think my gardener has a nicer one." "And the suit," Isabel added, wrinkling her nose. "It's like he actively tries to be forgettable. It's embarrassing for her. Marcus was so generous to offer him that little consulting gig. Did he even seem grateful?" "He was weirdly calm about it," Genevieve mused. "Almost smug. It's a strange sort of arrogance, the arrogance of the terminally mediocre. They convince themselves their simple life is a choice, a form of moral superiority." She laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. "As if. It's a coping mechanism for failure." They were utterly confident, insulated by their wealth and social standing. Their conversation soon turned to what really mattered, Marcus's latest triumph. His firm, Thorn Capital, was on the cusp of the deal of a lifetime. They were leading a consortium to acquire a smaller, innovative biotech lab, with the goal of flipping it for a massive profit. The key to the entire strategy was a potential partnership with a true industry giant. "Ethelred Pharmaceuticals," Genevieve said, the name spoken with hushed reverence. "If Marcus can get them to the table as a development partner, it's not just a win, it's a coronation. We'll be untouchable." "Is it likely?" Isabel asked, her eyes wide. "It's more than likely," Genevieve said with a confident smile. "Ethelred is notoriously private, but Marcus's sources say they're about to make a huge move in the oncology space. Our little biotech lab has a very promising, very early-stage compound. It's the perfect bait. Marcus is already preparing the pitch. He says this is the one that puts the Thorn name on the global map." Unbeknownst to them, the huge move they were gossiping about was already in motion. Miles away, in a sterile data room at Ethelred Global's headquarters, teams of analysts were working around the clock, preparing the Viridian Protocol data for public release. The preliminary numbers were astounding, far exceeding even the most optimistic internal projections. The efficacy rate was unprecedented. In his home office, Adrian reviewed the final reports on his encrypted network. He wasn't looking at them as a CEO giddy about future profits. He was looking at them as a scientist who had dedicated his life to solving a puzzle. He felt a profound sense of awe at what the data represented. Lives would be saved. Children would grow up who otherwise would not have. That was the core of it all. The financial implications, the strategic dominance it would create, were merely side effects, necessary ones in this case. He made a call, not to Evelyn this time, but to the head of the Ethelred Foundation, the company's massive charitable arm. "Dr. Alistair," Adrian said. "It's Adrian Vance." "Mr. Vance, an honor, sir," the man replied, his voice warm. "Alistair, at the gala in 4 weeks, I want to announce a new initiative, the Viridian Pledge. Ethelred will be committing 100% of the net profits from our new oncology therapy to fund free treatment for every child who needs it, globally, who is uninsured or underinsured." There was a stunned silence on the line. The numbers were astronomical, billions of dollars. "Mr. Vance, that's biblical," Dr. Alistair finally managed to say. "It's necessary," Adrian corrected him gently. "This breakthrough was never about profit. The profits are a tool, and we're going to use that tool to dismantle the barrier of cost. Can you have a framework ready for the announcement?" "We'll work on nothing else, sir. It will be our privilege." Adrian hung up. He leaned back, his gaze falling on a framed photo on his desk. It was of him and Clara, taken a few years ago on a hiking trip. They were laughing, windswept, and happy. Her smile was genuine, her eyes fixed on him with an uncomplicated adoration. That was the woman he had married, the woman he hoped was still there, underneath the layers of social anxiety and borrowed values. This move, the Viridian Pledge, wasn't part of the correction, it was part of the foundation. It was a statement of purpose. When the world learned who Adrian Vance was, he wanted them to understand not just the scale of his power, but the principles that guided it. The gala would be the stage. The announcement of the Viridian Protocol would be the thunder. The revelation of his identity would be the lightning. And for Marcus and Genevieve, who were so confidently sailing toward it, it would be the perfect, unexpected storm. The intervening weeks passed with a deceptive calm, the kind of stillness that precedes a seismic event. For Genevieve and Marcus, it was a period of heady anticipation. Marcus's pitch to Ethelred Pharmaceuticals had been accepted. He was scheduled to present his proposal for a strategic partnership to their executive board in the week following the Ethelred Foundation Gala. It felt like destiny. Every conversation, every social engagement was colored by this impending victory. They were already spending the money and prestige in their minds. They loved the initial prospectus, Marcus told Genevieve one evening, pacing their cavernous living room with a glass of scotch in hand. "My contact on the inside says the timing is perfect. They're looking for aggressive, nimble partners to help them roll out a new oncology platform. Our little lab is exactly that. We acquire it, they partner with us, and the valuation goes up 1,000%. It's printing money, Jen." "And the gala?" she asked, looking up from a magazine featuring a woman she had socially destroyed the previous season. "It's the perfect pre-victory lap," he grinned. "Everyone will be there, will be seen, will be photographed. By the time the news of the deal breaks the following week, we'll already be anointed. It's all about controlling the narrative." Their confidence was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. They saw the world as a simple chessboard, and they were the grand masters. They never once considered that they were merely pawns in a much larger game they didn't even know was being played. For Clara, these weeks were a quiet torment. The distance between her and Adrian had solidified into a new, painful normal. They coexisted in their beautiful home like polite, friendly ghosts. She found herself watching him, trying to decipher the man she thought she knew. She saw his kindness to their housekeeper, his patience with the landscaper, his deep focus when he was working in his office. She saw the man she fell in love with, but he was encased in a layer of reserve she couldn't break through. Her own life felt hollow. Lunches with Genevieve and Isabel, once a source of breezy fun, now felt like an ordeal. Their relentless talk of status, acquisitions, and social positioning grated on her nerves. Genevieve's crowing about Marcus's impending deal with Ethelred felt particularly empty. You and Adrian should come to the gala, Genevieve had insisted over the phone. It's the event of the season. You need to get out, Clara. You can't just mope around with, well, you know. Clara was about to refuse when Adrian walked into the room. He overheard Genevieve's suggestion. He met Clara's eyes and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Actually, Jen, Clara said, surprised at herself, we'd love to. We'll be there. When she hung up, she looked at him puzzled. Why? You hate those things. It will just be more of the same. Marcus preening, Genevieve judging everyone's shoes. It's an important night, Adrian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For the foundation. I think it's important we show our support. His answer was plausible, but it felt incomplete. There was an undercurrent she couldn't grasp. A strange sense of finality hung in the air. She agreed, driven by a desperate hope that this shared event, this return to a semblance of their old life, might be a bridge back to him. She had no idea she was agreeing to walk onto a stage that had been set with meticulous, devastating precision. The night of the Aethelred Foundation Gala arrived. It was a crisp, clear autumn evening. As Adrian held the car door for her, Clara felt a flutter of the old affection. He looked impossibly handsome. He was wearing a classic, perfectly tailored black tuxedo. It was simple, unadorned, but it fit him with an understated elegance that was more striking than any of Marcus's flashy, fashion-forward ensembles. On his wrist was the same watch, the one that had belonged to his father. The car ride was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had followed her birthday party. That silence had been cold and empty. This one was charged, humming with a palpable energy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Adrian's hands were steady on the wheel, his profile calm, but Clara could sense a coiled tension in him, a focus so intense it was almost a physical force. She placed a hand on his arm. "Are you okay, Addie? You seem intense tonight." He turned to her, and for the first time in weeks, the analytical distance in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something else, something she couldn't quite read. It looked like resolve, but it was tinged with a deep, profound sadness. He placed his hand over hers. "Everything is going to change after tonight, Clara," he said, his voice low. "Just remember, whatever happens, the man you're with is the same man who makes you coffee every morning. The man who loves how you hum when you read. Nothing else matters." Her heart pounded. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" Before he could answer, the car was pulling up to the grand entrance of the museum, where the gala was being held. A river of black cars flowed toward a phalanx of photographers and reporters held back by velvet ropes. The building was lit up in Aethelred's corporate blue, a beacon of wealth and influence. "Just stay close to me," was all he said as the valet opened his door. He came around and opened her door, taking her hand. As she stepped out onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs erupted. For a moment, she was blinded. She held onto Adrian's arm, her anchor in the dazzling, overwhelming chaos. This was the quiet before the storm. They were standing at the edge of a precipice, and she was about to find out that the man holding her hand didn't just know how to navigate this world, he had built it. The air was electric with unspoken truths, and the first clap of thunder was only moments away. The grand hall of the museum was breathtaking. Ancient sculptures stood silent watch over a sea of modern power brokers. The air buzzed with 1,000 conversations, a symphony of ambition and influence. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. This was the apex of the world Genevieve and Marcus worshipped, and they were at its very center. They spotted Clara and Adrian almost immediately. Genevieve, draped in a column of glittering red sequins, nudged Marcus. They glided toward their prey, their smiles wide and predatory. "Clara, darling, you came!" Genevieve exclaimed, air-kissing both of Clara's cheeks. Her eyes swept over Adrian, taking in the simple tuxedo, the familiar old watch. Her expression was one of bored pity. "Adrian," Good of you to show up and support the cause. Marcus, radiating smug triumph, clapped Adrian firmly on the shoulder. The gesture was heavy with condescension. Still consulting, old boy? He boomed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Good for you. Persistence is key. You know, after my Aethelred deal closes next week, my company is going to need a whole fleet of consultants. I'll keep you in mind. Maybe we can finally get you into a real office. Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. He simply met Marcus's gaze, his own eyes placid as a frozen lake. I appreciate the thought, Marcus, he said, his voice even. Clara felt a surge of familiar shame, but it was quickly replaced by a strange, protective anger. Adrian's words from the car echoed in her mind. Everything is going to change after tonight. She held onto his arm a little tighter, a small, belated gesture of solidarity. Genevieve, sensing Clara's shift in mood, tried to pull her away. Come, darling, I want to introduce you to the Vicomte de Brissac. He's utterly charming and fabulously wealthy. But Clara didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on her husband. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the charged atmosphere, in the unnerving stillness of Adrian's posture. Just then, the lights in the hall dimmed slightly. A respectful hush fell over the crowd as a woman walked to the podium on the stage at the far end of the room. She was tall, elegant, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of absolute command. This was Evelyn Reed, the president and COO of Aethelred Global, one of the most powerful women in the world. Genevieve leaned in to whisper to Clara, "That's Evelyn Reed, the Ice Queen. They say she's the real power behind the Aethelred throne. The owner is some mysterious recluse no one has ever seen." On stage, Evelyn tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the vast space. "On behalf of the Aethelred Foundation, thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight. Your support enables us to continue our vital work in communities around the world." She spoke for a few minutes about the Foundation's initiatives, her delivery polished and professional. Marcus watched, rapt, a student observing a master. This was the world he wanted to join. Then, Evelyn's tone shifted. "Tonight, however, is a particularly special occasion," she said, a rare warmth entering her voice. "We are on the verge of a breakthrough that will not only redefine our company, but will change the face of pediatric medicine forever. This achievement is the result of over a decade of tireless work, guided by a singular vision." A murmur of excitement went through the room. This was it, the big announcement Marcus had been anticipating. "For many years," Evelyn continued, "our founder has chosen to remain private, believing that the work should always be more important than the individual. He built Aethelred Global from a single idea, not with a desire for fame or recognition, but with a relentless passion to solve the unsolvable. But tonight, to mark this pivotal moment, he has agreed to step forward." The room was utterly silent. Every eye was on Evelyn Reed. Marcus and Genevieve were practically vibrating with anticipation, believing this was all part of the prelude to their own ascension. Evelyn smiled. "It is my profound honor and my personal privilege to introduce the man whose quiet genius and unwavering integrity have made all of this possible. The founder, chairman, and sole owner of Aethelred Global, Mr. Adrian Vance." The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. The name didn't register. The crowd looked around confused, searching for some titan of industry they had overlooked. Genevieve and Marcus scanned the faces near the stage, their brows furrowed. Then Adrian gave Clara's hand a gentle squeeze. He leaned in and whispered, "I love you," his voice for her ears alone. And he began to walk toward the stage. He didn't rush. He moved with the same unhurried, deliberate pace he always did. But now his calm demeanor looked different. It was not the placidity of a simple man. It was the absolute, unshakable confidence of a king walking through his own court. A spotlight, as if by magic, found him and followed him. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. Whispers turned into gasps. People who had ignored him all night, people who had looked straight through him, now stared, their mouths agape. Clara felt the world tilt on its axis. Her hand flew to her mouth, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Her mind reeled, trying to connect the two images. Adrian, her quiet, sweet, unassuming husband, who fixed leaky faucets and made coffee in the morning, and Adrian Vance, the mythical, reclusive owner of a $78 billion empire. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. The consulting, the late nights in his office, the strange diagrams, the trip to Switzerland for a finance conference. It all made a terrifying, brilliant new kind of sense. But her shock was nothing compared to what was happening on the faces of Genevieve and Marcus. They were frozen, their triumphant smiles curdling into masks of grotesque disbelief. Marcus's face had gone slack, the color draining from it until it was the color of ash. Genevieve's sequin dress seemed to mock her, a gaudy costume for a tragedy. Her perfectly painted mouth was open, but no sound came out. They looked like statues, monuments to their own spectacular, public ruin. Adrian reached the stage and took the podium from a smiling Evelyn Reed. The room was so quiet you could hear the blood pounding in Clara's ears. Adrian looked out over the sea of stunned faces, his gaze sweeping past the politicians, the billionaires, the celebrities. His eyes found Marcus and Genevieve. He held their gaze for a long, silent moment. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed. Then he began to speak. And with his first words, the quiet bomb that had been ticking all night finally, definitively detonated. Adrian's voice, amplified by the microphone, filled the cavernous hall. It was the same calm, measured voice he had used all evening, but now it carried an undeniable weight, the innate authority of a man who owned the very air everyone was breathing. "Thank you, Evelyn," he began, nodding to his COO. He then turned his gaze back to the audience, his eyes once again finding and locking onto Marcus and Genevieve. They were still frozen, trapped in the spotlight of his attention. "My friend Evelyn spoke of vision," Adrian said, "but vision is meaningless without values. At Aethelred, our primary value is integrity. It's the principle that guides every decision we make, from the lab to the boardroom. Integrity means your word is your bond. It means you treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. It means that you understand that true worth is not something you can wear on your wrist or hang in your closet." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. He was speaking to the entire room, but the message was aimed at a party of two. Genevieve flinched as if struck. Marcus's jaw worked silently, his mind finally catching up to the catastrophe that had befallen him. "A person's character," Adrian continued, his voice steady, "is not revealed when they are posturing for the powerful. It is revealed in how they treat those they believe to be powerless." He paused, letting the words hang in the dead silent air. He was systematically dismantling their entire worldview, using their own petty insults as the building blocks of his argument. This was the list of grievances, delivered not as a vindictive rant, but as a calm, philosophical lesson on a global stage. "Tonight we are announcing the success of the Viridian Protocol." He gestured to a large screen behind him, which lit up with charts and data, the astonishing efficacy numbers clear for all to see. A collective gasp went through the audience as they absorbed the magnitude of the breakthrough. "This therapy will save the lives of thousands of children. It is the culmination of my life's work." He then delivered the next blow. "It has also come to my attention that other firms, hearing rumors of our progress, have been attempting to acquire smaller labs in the hopes of being acquired by us or partnering with us to profit from our innovation. Let me be unequivocally clear." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes like chips of ice. "Ethelred Global will not be partnering with, nor acquiring, any firm whose leadership demonstrates a lack of fundamental integrity. We will not do business with opportunists. We will not reward arrogance. Our partners will be chosen based on the content of their character, not the size of their ambition. It was a death sentence. Marcus visibly staggered, putting a hand on a nearby table to steady himself. The Aethelred deal wasn't just his coronation, it was his lifeline. His entire acquisition was leveraged against it. Without Aethelred, he wasn't just back at square one, he was ruined. Adrian wasn't finished. He then announced the Viridian Pledge, the commitment to donate all profits to provide the drug for free to children in need. This was the masterstroke. It elevated him beyond a mere corporate titan and into the realm of a visionary philanthropist. It made Marcus's naked profit-seeking seem not just pathetic, but grotesque by comparison. He had exposed their greed and then contrasted it with his own radical generosity. He concluded his speech. True power isn't about dominance, it's about service. It's not about what you can acquire, it's about what you can contribute. That is the foundation upon which Aethelred was built, and it is the principle that will guide our future. Thank you. A moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, rolling wave of it. People were on their feet. The respect was deafening. Adrian, the quiet consultant, the boring husband, was being feted as a hero, a genius, a secular saint. He stepped down from the stage, ignoring the swarm of reporters and well-wishers trying to get to him. His security detail, men in discreet suits who had been invisible moments before, materialized around him, forming a calm perimeter. He moved through the crowd with one destination in mind: Clara. She was still standing where he had left her, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of shame or shock anymore. They were tears of awe, of understanding, of a profound and painful love. He had not just revealed his wealth, he had revealed his soul. He had shown her the man he was, and in doing so, had shown her the woman she had failed to be. As he approached, the crowd parted, giving them a wide berth. But before he could reach her, a desperate figure stumbled into his path. It was Marcus. His face was a wreck of sweat and panic. "Adrian," he croaked, his voice raw. "Mr. Vance, sir, I had no idea. It was a joke. All of it. Just stupid party talk. It meant nothing." Adrian stopped. He looked at the man who had, an hour ago, offered him charity. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, weary sadness. The words meant nothing, Marcus? Or did you believe the man you were speaking to meant nothing? Please, Marcus begged, his voice cracking. He was disintegrating. "The deal, my company, my life, everything is tied to this. You can't do this." Genevieve was right behind him, her face a pale, horrified mask. Her own social world was collapsing in real time. Everyone was watching. The Vicomte de Brissac was staring at her with cold contempt. "I am not doing anything to you, Marcus," Adrian said, his voice quiet but carrying with absolute finality. "Your situation is a consequence of your own choices. You built a house of cards on a foundation of arrogance. You were so busy looking up at the throne, you never thought to check who was sitting in it." He then looked past him, at Genevieve. "My suit, as you pointed out, is indeed simple. I find it leaves more capital for, say, funding a new oncology wing. It's a matter of priorities." He then turned his back on them both, a dismissal more complete than any shouted insult. He walked the final few feet to Clara. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "We need to talk," he said softly. She could only nod, her world shattered and remade in the space of 10 minutes. He took her hand, and his security detail closed ranks, guiding them through the chaos of his new reality, leaving Marcus and Genevieve alone in the center of the room, utterly destroyed, in the ruins of a world that had suddenly, irrevocably, ceased to be theirs. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. Adrian's security team, efficient and unobtrusive, guided him and Clara through a private exit, bypassing the frantic scrum of reporters now chanting his name. They were ushered into the back of a black town car, a different one from the one they'd arrived in, its windows deeply tinted, its interior a silent sanctuary from the storm they had just unleashed. Clara sat numbly, staring at her hands in her lap. The man beside her was her husband, yet he was a stranger. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, Marcus's crumbling face, Genevieve's silent horror, the thunderous applause, Adrian's calm, devastating speech. It was like watching a movie, too dramatic and perfectly scripted to be real. Adrian was on his satellite phone, his voice once again the crisp, cool instrument of command. Evelyn, excellent work. Yes, the media response will be overwhelming. I want a complete blackout. No interviews, no profiles. All inquiries are to be routed through the foundation. The message is the work, not the man. Understood. He ended the call and the silence returned to the car, thick and heavy. Clara finally found her voice, a weak, trembling thing. You own Ethelred Global, she stated, the fact still feeling alien on her tongue. Yes, he said. The whole thing. Yes. You're one of the richest men in the world. He turned to her, and in the dim light of the car, she saw the weariness in his eyes. That's a metric, Clara. It's not an identity. Does it change who I am? I don't know, she cried, the dam of her composure finally breaking. I don't know who you are. The man I married is a kind, brilliant, humble consultant who likes to read history books and can't cook rice to save his life. This man, this Adrian Vance, he just publicly executed my best friends without even raising his voice. So yes, I think it changes things. I did not execute them, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. I held up a mirror. They crashed into their own reflection. What you saw tonight was not an act of revenge. It was a clarification. A clarification? She asked, incredulous. It was a demolition. Marcus is ruined. You know he is. Genevieve, her entire life is built on the status you just stripped from them. And what was that status built on? He countered, his voice sharp for the first time. It was built on mocking people they deemed lesser, on a sense of entitlement so profound they believed their world was the only one that mattered. They were bullies, Clara. Polished, well-dressed, articulate bullies. Did you not see that? They were my friends, she whispered brokenly. Were they? He asked, the question hanging between them. Or were you just another part of their collection? The beautiful wife with the simple, harmless husband, a perfect accessory to make them feel more sophisticated, more powerful by comparison. The truth of it was a physical pain. She had been their court jester, and she hadn't even known it. She had brought her lion of a husband into their den and allowed them to treat him like a lapdog. The shame was suffocating. Back at the gala, the party was imploding. Adrian's departure had left a vacuum that was quickly filled with frantic, feverish gossip. Marcus and Genevieve stood abandoned in the middle of the floor, the crowd giving them a wide berth as if they were contagious. Marcus was frantically trying to get his banker on the phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely operate his smartphone. It's a misunderstanding, he kept muttering to himself, his voice a ragged whisper. Just a public negotiation tactic. Genevieve was worse. Her mask of haughty indifference had completely shattered, revealing the terrified, insecure woman beneath. She saw people she had known for years, people she had vacationed with, whose children's birthdays she attended, looking at her with a mixture of pity and undisguised schadenfreude. The social predators had smelled blood, and they were turning on one of their own. She tried to catch the eye of Isabel, her other close friend, who had been part of the mockery at the birthday party. But Isabel was pointedly looking away, locked in a deep, sudden conversation with a man she'd been ignoring minutes earlier. She was already creating distance, saving herself. A prominent society blogger, A woman Genevieve had once tried to have blacklisted from an event, walked past her. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, a small, tight, viciously satisfied smile. In that moment, Genevieve understood. It was over. Not just the deal, everything. Her reign as a queen of her petty social kingdom was at an end. She had been publicly dethroned by the one man she had never even considered a player on the board. The drive home for Adrian and Clara was long. When they arrived, the house felt different. It was no longer just a beautiful, peaceful home. It was the headquarters of a global empire, and she was living in it like a guest. Adrian walked into the kitchen and did what he always did. He began to prepare a pot of chamomile tea. The simple, domestic act was so at odds with the evening's events that Clara felt a fresh wave of disorientation. "How could you not tell me?" she asked, following him. "For 5 years. We've been married for 5 years. My husband is a billionaire philanthropist, a scientific genius, and I thought he was a management consultant. How is that possible?" He turned from the counter, his expression softening with a profound sorrow. "Because I needed one part of my life to be real," he said, his voice quiet. "Everything out there," he gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the world, "is about Ethelred. It's about the company, the stock price, the brand. It's a role I play. But with you, I didn't want to be Adrian Vance, the founder. I just wanted to be Adrian. You're Adrian. I fell in love with you, Clara, and you fell in love with a man you thought was ordinary. It was the only way I could be sure it was real, that you saw me and not the metrics." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. He had hidden his empire from her not as a lie, but as a defense for them. And she had, in her own way, betrayed that trust by failing to defend the ordinary man he had chosen to be for her. "So what you saw tonight," he continued, "was me being forced to merge those two worlds. They brought their toxic, shallow game into our home, and you allowed it. So I had to play the game on their field, by their rules, just to show them how meaningless it was." He paused, his gaze intense. "The only thing I regret about tonight is that it was necessary." The kettle whistled, a shrill, mundane sound in the electrically charged room. Adrian turned to pour the water. Clara watched his steady hands, the same hands that had sketched the molecular structure of a life-saving drug, now performing this simple, comforting ritual. She understood, with devastating clarity, that the chasm between them wasn't about money or secrets. It was about the question he had been asking himself for weeks. Who was she, really? And now, standing in the quiet of her billionaire husband's kitchen, she realized she didn't have the answer. The weeks that followed the gala were a slow, brutal unfolding of consequences. The story of Adrian Vance's dramatic reveal was too spectacular to be contained. Despite his no-comment strategy, the media pieced it together. The narrative was irresistible. The humble, underestimated husband, the arrogant socialites, the public, poetic justice. It became a modern-day fable. For Marcus and Genevieve, the fable was a horror story. Marcus's firm, Thorn Capital, imploded with breathtaking speed. The Ethelred partnership had been the linchpin of his latest acquisition, which he had financed with massive, high-interest loans. When news broke that Ethelred had not only rejected him, but publicly repudiated his entire business ethos, his creditors called in their loans simultaneously. The stock of his publicly traded holding company plummeted to zero in a single day of trading. He was not just ruined, he was erased from the financial world. They lost the penthouse, the cars, the entire architecture of their lives. The final, bitter irony was that Marcus was forced to declare bankruptcy, his case handled by a court-appointed trustee who drove a 10-year-old sedan and wore a simple, steel-cased watch. Genevieve's fall was less financial, but, in its own way, more complete. The social world she had so carefully cultivated turned on her with vicious speed. Her invitations dried up. Her calls went unreturned. The friends who had once flocked to her side now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a living cautionary tale. Her name became a synonym for hubris. People didn't just stop admiring her, they actively disdained her. She had built her identity on the validation of others, and when that validation was withdrawn, she discovered she had no identity left. Isabel, their former friend, was now a regular at charity events sponsored by the Aethelred Foundation, praising Adrian Vance's humility and vision to anyone who would listen. Clara watched all of this from the gilded cage of her home. Adrian never spoke of it. He never said, "I told you so." He never gloated. He simply continued his work, his days now filled with the public demands of being Adrian Vance. The house was often filled with serious-looking people from the foundation or the company, and he moved among them with an easy authority that still took her breath away. But with her, he remained distant, polite, kind, but remote. The glass wall was still there, thicker than ever. The beautiful house, once their shared sanctuary, now felt like his world, and she was just a resident. She would find herself wandering through its silent, perfect rooms, touching the expensive furniture, looking at the important art on the walls, and feeling like an imposter. The shame of the birthday party had not faded. It had settled deep in her bones, a constant, low-grade fever. She understood now that Adrian's greatest asset wasn't his fortune, it was his integrity. And she had shown him that hers was for sale, available for the cheap price of social comfort. One afternoon, she was in the walk-in closet, a room larger than most New York apartments, surrounded by clothes and shoes she had bought to keep up with Genevieve. She looked at the rows of designer labels, the it bags, the shoes that cost more than a monthly salary for most people. They had once been her armor, her tools for fitting in. Now they looked like props from a life that wasn't hers. They felt hollow, meaningless. They were symbols of the values she had adopted, the values that had caused her to fail the most important test of her life. She realized Adrian was waiting. He was waiting to see what she would do, who she would become, now that the glittering, toxic influence of her friends was gone. Would she cling to the lifestyle, the wealth, the status by proxy? Or would she find a different foundation to build her life upon? The silence in the house was no longer just a space between them. It was a question, and she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that she had to be the one to answer it. She couldn't live in his world as a beautifully kept ghost. She had to find her own. That evening, she packed a single suitcase. She didn't fill it with the designer clothes or expensive jewelry. She packed a few pairs of jeans, some simple sweaters, her favorite books, and a framed photo from her nightstand. The one of her and Adrian on their hiking trip, the one where they were both genuinely happy. She found Adrian in his office, looking over architectural plans for a new research hospital. He looked up as she stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady, surprising herself. A flicker of something, pain, disappointment, crossed his face before his calm mask slipped back into place. "I see," he said quietly. "If you need anything—" "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "You don't understand. I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving this." She gestured around the magnificent room, at the house, at the life of Adrian Vance, chairman of Aethelred Global. "I can't fix what's broken between us while I'm living in your castle, wearing clothes I bought to impress people I don't even like, feeling like a fraud every second of the day." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Adrian, but I lost myself. I let my own sense of worth get tangled up in the opinions of shallow, cruel people. I can't ask you to respect me until I respect myself, and I can't do that here." She had found a small, one-bedroom apartment across town, near an art gallery where she had applied for a job as an assistant curator, a dream she had deferred years ago. She was going to use her own savings, the money she had earned and put away from her career before she married him. "I need to find out who I am without your name, without your money, without Genevieve's approval," she continued, her voice thick with emotion but firm with resolve. "I need to be a person you could have been proud of that night at the party, and I have to do it on my own." She walked over to his desk and placed a letter on top of the blueprints. "This is not a goodbye," she said, her eyes meeting his. "It's a promise. A promise to become the woman the man I married deserves." Adrian looked at the letter, then back at her. For the first time since the gala, the mask of calm composure finally cracked. He stood up, his eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't decipher. Was it pride? Hope? He took a step toward her, then stopped. He understood. This was her journey, and he could not walk it for her. He had to let her go, to see if she would find her way back. "Be safe, Clara," he said, his voice husky. She nodded, tears blurring her vision. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in his magnificent office, the silent king of an empire, suddenly, utterly alone. As she walked out of the house and into the uncertainty of her new life, she didn't feel afraid. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of her own independent worth. 6 months passed, 6 months of quiet, deliberate rebuilding. Clara's new life was the antithesis of her old one. Her apartment was small, with mismatched furniture and walls she had painted herself. It was humble, but it was hers. Every book on the shelf, every piece of art pinned to the wall, was a reflection of her own taste, not a curator's or a socialite's. She got the job at the art gallery. The pay was modest, the work often menial, making coffee, answering phones, updating inventory. But she loved it. She was surrounded by creativity, by passion, by things that had value not because they were expensive, but because they were expressive. She learned the stories behind the artists, their struggles and their triumphs. For the first time in years, she felt like she was a part of something authentic. She did not contact Adrian, and he, respecting her need for space, did not contact her. The letter she had left him remained unanswered, but she hadn't expected a reply. It had been a declaration, not a petition. Her actions would be her real message. She occasionally saw his face in the news, announcing a new scholarship program, breaking ground on the hospital he had been designing. He looked serious, powerful, and a million miles away. But every night she looked at the photo of them on the hiking trip and held on to the memory of the man who made her laugh, the man she was fighting to be worthy of again. She cut off all contact with her old circle. She changed her number. She focused on her new life, her new work, and the slow, difficult process of self-forgiveness. She learned that dignity wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you cultivated within yourself. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year to the day since the fateful gala, she was hanging a new piece in the gallery when the bell above the door chimed. She turned, a professional smile on her face, and it faltered. It was Adrian. He was dressed not in a bespoke suit, but in a simple dark sweater and jeans. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were clear. He looked like her Adrian. "The gallery is closed for installation," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know," he said. "I'm not a customer." He looked around the small, light-filled space, his eyes taking in the vibrant, eclectic art. "This is a wonderful space. It feels alive." "I like it here," she said, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans. An awkward silence fell between them. A year of unspoken thoughts and feelings hung in the air. Adrian was the one to break it. "Your letter," he began. "I've read it 100 times. You wrote that you wanted to become the woman the man you married deserves." He took a step closer, his gaze searching hers. "Clara, the man you married already thought you were more than he deserved. That's why he was so afraid of losing you to a world he despised." Tears pricked her eyes. "I let that world in, Addie. I let it hurt you. My silence, it was a betrayal." "Yes, it was," he said, and the simple, honest agreement was a relief. There were no platitudes, no easy forgiveness, just the truth. "It was a betrayal of me, but more than that, It was a betrayal of yourself. You are not a shallow person, Clara. You are kind and smart and passionate. You just started listening to the wrong voices, including the ones in your own head that told you you weren't enough. He looked at her, at the paint smudge on her cheek, the genuine confidence in her posture. The woman I see in front of me now, she knows she's enough. She isn't trying to be anyone. She just is. He reached out and gently touched the smudge on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. I was never angry about the insults, Clara. I was heartbroken that you couldn't see the man you loved through the noise of their judgment. I see him now, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I see him so clearly. I've missed you, he said, his voice cracking with a year's worth of loneliness. The house is just a house without you. It's perfect and beautiful and completely empty. I've missed you too, she cried, the tears finally falling. Every single day. He didn't ask her to come home. He didn't make demands. He just opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar, beloved scent of him. It felt like coming home after a long, arduous journey. It wasn't a magical fix. It was a beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, built not on secrets and assumptions, but on a foundation of hard-won self-worth and mutual respect. He held her for a long time, the silence in the gallery filled only with the sound of their breathing. Come home, Clara, he finally whispered into her hair. Not to my house, to our house. Let's build a life together. Not my life that you live in, but ours. She looked up at him, her face wet with tears, but her smile was radiant. Okay, she said, but on one condition. Anything. You have to let me teach you how to cook rice properly. He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. And in that moment, the billionaire, the philanthropist, the genius, was gone. It was just Adrian, her Adrian. And it was more than enough. They walked out of the gallery hand in hand, leaving the past behind them, stepping into a future that was finally, truly, their own. Their path wasn't a red carpet leading to a grand ballroom, but a simple city sidewalk leading toward a shared life, their footsteps falling into a comfortable, familiar rhythm. And so, their story reminds us of a profound and simple truth. True worth is not measured by the noise of applause or the glitter of wealth. It is a quiet, internal certainty. It is the integrity you maintain when no one is watching, and the dignity you show to those who believe you are no one. Respect is not a prize to be won or a status to be claimed. It is the silent, powerful reflection of your own character. Arrogance builds castles of sand, but humility, patience, and integrity build empires of stone. What do you think? Was Adrian's response justified, or was it too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to read your perspectives. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and satisfying justice. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, remember to value the things that can't be bought.